Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, I'm Nailil Izzah. My student ID is 2520112. I'm from Multimodal Listening and Speaking C. Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss about contextual understanding. So without further ado, let's start. Contextual understanding. This chapter focuses on how a text interpretation, language choice, and overall shape change depending on the context, fostering its production and use. When listeners and speakers construct and understand spoken text, a variety of factors influence the choice of language and the way they shape the text. These factors are important for students to understand. The first one is the purpose of the communication. Communication serves 5 major purposes, which are to inform, to express feelings, to imagine, to influence, and to meet social expectations. The second one is the subject matter. The subject matter of communication is a message. It's the idea or information that the sender wants to convey. The third one is the roles of those communicating and the relationship between them. For example, like a mother and her daughter. So, the relationship between them is a family. The fourth one is the situation surrounding the communication. And the last one is the socio-cultural beliefs and values of those participating in the communication. Well, the next topic is developing contextual understanding for speaking and listening. In order to develop communicative competence, students need to understand the way speaking and listening can be adjusted to meet the demands of variety of contexts. They also need to be aware of the ways in which spoken language can be manipulated for different purposes. In the developing contextual understanding for speaking and listening, there are 2 things that we are going to discuss. The first one is situational context. Situational context is a context when students learn that the purpose, audience, and situation affect the decisions and choices that they make. The decisions that students make about their speaking and listening will vary according to the context. These decisions are influenced by many things. The first one is the situation or setting in which the speaking and listening takes place. For example, who speaks at meeting, when to speak and when not to speak at the cinema, when to speak and when not to speak when there are visitors at home. The second one is the purpose of the speaking and listening. For example, when we want to say thank you to someone, when we want to ask someone for help, and when we want to discuss a book or deliver a lecture. The third one is the roles and relationship between the speakers and listeners. For example, family and friends, teacher, principal, shop assistant, doctor, and police officer. And then the physical setting of the communication. For example, at home, classroom, mosque, public library, restaurant, mall, and so on. And next, the mode of the communication. For example, like face-to-face with one person or several people, telephone conversation or inquiry, radio, or using a microphone with a large audience, and the last one is the topic being discussed. Okay, the second thing is socio-cultural context. In socio-cultural context, students also need to know that socio-cultural beliefs, values, and assumptions affect those participating in communication. There are many socio-cultural factors that influence the composition and comprehension of spoken text. The first one is the way that people use spoken language reflects and shapes their view of the world. The second one is speakers and listeners are strongly influenced by their gender, ethnicity, and status. The third one is spoken language is used to establish relationships and group identity. The fourth one is there are many different varieties of English around the world, including varieties of standard English. And the last one is spoken text can be crafted and manipulated to influence others. For students to speak and listen effectively for various purposes and audiences, they need to be aware of the following factors. The first one is speakers and listeners make critical decisions when composing and comprehending spoken text. Students need to learn how to vary the language they use based on the context they are in. This is known as changing register. There are three components that made up register. They are field, or topic that being discussed or talked about, and then tenor is the relationship between speaker and listener, and mode is how the speaker and listener deliver the spoken text. The second one is speakers adjust their speech as they identify with different groups. When people speak to the same groups of people frequently, they form speech communities. They will have a lot in common and won't always need to explain the things they talk about because they already share a lot of information. Meanwhile, when people move from one group to another, they create links between the speech communities and form speech networks. In this way, students develop a speech repertoire that will vary for different speech communities. For example, a junior high school student having a conversation with a senior high school student. Number 1. Students as researchers of language. Students can learn about adjusting spoken language by analyzing the different speech communities they belong to and the different speech networks they have formed. Number 2. Making comparisons. In order to understand how different registers are chosen, students could compare speaking and listening. Students analyze spoken text in this way, learning about the components that make up the text structures and qualities, as well as the socio-cultural effects of their decisions. Number 3. Examining a speech from a family gathering. Students can easily attend family gatherings like birthday parties, anniversaries, and engagement parties. Students will be helped when they start researching speech adjustments in less familiar contexts if they can explore how speaking and listening adjustments are made in familiar context. Number 4. Investigating community-based speaking and listening. Investigating speaking and listening in the community involves examining where and how speaking and listening are used. The investigation might focus on one or more of the following guiding questions. The first question is, what functions of language were addressed in the event? Number 2, what conventions were needed? Number 3, what behaviors were expected? And then speakers and listeners' consideration of different points of view can confirm, broaden, or challenge an existing new. Spoken text can be interpreted from different points of view. Students can explore point of view by looking at things people might disagree on. Next, the social and cultural background of language users will influence their speaking and listening choices. Number 1. Interpreting gaps and silences. There are gaps and silences in spoken text. Listeners interpret these gaps differently based on their own socio-cultural context. Spoken texts designed to persuade tend to highlight particular information and ignore other points. Number 2. Assuming shared knowledge. Speakers might assume that listeners share their cultural knowledge and values. Teachers should involve students in collecting stories about situations where shared cultural knowledge and values were assumed but which resulted in misunderstanding. Number 3. Dominant values. The values of a dominant group or culture are often represented as the norm. Many of the structures in society are taken for granted and can seem normal and acceptable unless they are questioned. And then speakers consciously select and use linguistic devices to enhance impact or to influence particular audiences. And the last one is spoken text can be investigated and analyzed to reveal their values and assumptions. Developing contextual understanding allows students to interpret these messages and to recognize that spoken texts are not neutral evaluate the beliefs and values that underpin spoken text, make informed decisions about their own views on specific topics, recognize ways in which people are positioned to show or acknowledge power, and the last one is become aware that language is constructed and manipulated to influence or persuade. The next topic is developing critical awareness. It is important that students understand that language is a dynamic social process that shapes and is shaped by constantly changing social conditions. The use of English is inextricably involved with values, beliefs, and ways of thinking about the world we inhabit. The next topic is embedding speaking and listening within the classroom. Studying how spoken text can vary in different contexts is an important focus area for contextual understanding. Teachers should provide a variety of purposeful contexts in the classroom, such as collaborative activities, plays, simulations, and presentations of learning. These activities allow students to develop their understanding of how spoken language varies according to the context. And the last topic is focusing on contextual understanding in a unit of work. It's important for teachers to plan and design a variety of contexts that involve students using speaking and listening skills. This allows students to develop the critical awareness needed for using spoken language in ways appropriate to the situation. Students need experiences where they can explore, discuss, and practice the spoken language required for different contexts. Units of work can provide many such experiences. Speaking and listening play an important role in the inquiry process. Play is an important context as it follows students to practice the speaking and listening required for different contexts. Different audiences demanded different listening and speaking skills and behaviors. So everyone, that's all of my presentation about contextual understanding. I do apologize for all mistakes that I have made. Thank you so very much for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.